All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our BCBA practice question series, where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Jeremy is driving in his car across town to a place he has never been before to meet some friends. His Google Maps is not working, so he has to try and navigate based on the directions that were given to him by his friend. Jeremy turns down the radio so that he can think better about what his friend told him. Thinking in this context is considered what? All right, so we're looking at this idea of thinking. And in this context, when does Jeremy start thinking? Well, he's driving, he needs to find his friend's place. His GPS isn't working. And so he turns down the radio so he can think better. And turning down the radio to think better is a very common example of how consequences and antecedents affect behavior. But we're not worried about turning down the radio. So remember, always be focused on what the question is asking. We're worried about thinking. And thinking in this context is considered what? Is thinking a consequence? Not a consequence, because thinking is a response, right? It's the antecedent. He turns down the radio. The behavior of the response is thinking. Thinking is a behavior. You got to remember that. Now, is thinking a public event? Is thinking a public behavior? It's not. Nobody can see you thinking. Even if someone is observing, they're not watching you think. And you can say, well, sometimes you can tell when someone's thinking. Sometimes, but consistently and reliably, no, because thinking is an internal process. In other words, thinking is C, a private event. Thoughts and feelings are private events. In radical behaviorism, we acknowledge thoughts and feelings as behavior. We acknowledge that thoughts and feelings are affected just like public other operant behaviors. The only difference between a public and a private event is the observability of each of them. A public event is observable. A private event is not. Thinking is a behavior, but it is not observable, making it a private event. And thinking is not a mentalism. Mentalisms are constructs and explanations that we use to explain away phenomena. Thinking is something that's happening as a result of our antecedents and consequences. It's an internal event, it's an internal behavior, making thinking C a private event. Two parents want their child to stop saying no in response to everything they say. The child typically says no 50% of the time given the opportunity. The parents have started to make statements to the child instead of asking the child so many questions. The child is now saying no only 30% of the time. The parents have changed nothing else. What dimension is most demonstrated here? All right, interesting question, because when you first start reading it, you might start to think, well, this might be a measurement question. Because remember, we're trying to predict things as we go through the question. Because when you're predicting, you're engaging with the question, but it's not measurement. We're talking about dimensions here. So what dimension are we focused on? And you've got to be very careful with dimension questions, because our 7 dimensions, they're very interrelated and interconnected. And so when you have a dimension question, you want to be very precise and very specific. So what do we know? Always ask yourself, what do we know? We know parents want the child to stop saying no. Right now, the child says no 50% of the time. Now the parents have changed something, right? Because now they're making statements instead of asking questions. The child is now saying no 30% of the time. Well, let's think about that. The child says no 50% of the time. The parents change something, right? They start an intervention or they have an independent variable. They're making statements and the behavior changes. They've changed nothing else. So have the parents established a functional relationship? Well, based on this information, they have. It appears they have functional control over the behavior. They've changed nothing else except for making statements that's affected the behavior consistently. So what dimension are we talking about? A, generality. Have we talked about generalization at all? No. We just know in this very small vacuum, based on this information, this is what's occurring. We're not talking about generalization here. What about analytic? Well, we have established there appears to be this functional relationship going on. It appears the parents have functional control over the behavior. So the dimension is likely analytic. We read all of our answer choices. C, technological. Are the parents writing this in a way or designing this in a way where it's replicable? Well, we're not sure. Technological means you write things, you design things, you create things that can be replicated. And we don't have any info on replication, so we're not sure about C. And then D, conceptually systematic. Have we talked about any behavior principles at all? Be careful, because we haven't. We're not talking about reinforcement. We're not talking about consequences here. All we know is the child said no 50% of the time. The parents now make statements instead of questions. The child now says no 30% of the time. We didn't talk about behavior analytic concepts really at all. So we're not sure if it's conceptually systematic. What we know for sure, though, is it's analytic. And because, how do we know? Because due to the fact that the behavior has changed, and the only thing that's changed is the intervention. So the thing that's affecting and controlling the behavior is the parent's intervention, making this be analytic. See, these can be a little challenging. You've got to be very precise and very careful on dimension questions. A mathematician will sometimes talk to himself while solving complex problems. Talking to himself helps the mathematician work through roadblocks he encounters while solving the problem. What could the function of talking to himself be if it helps remove the roadblocks? All right, so it's a function question. And function questions really should be pretty straightforward. Functions are one of your most basic ideas and concepts, and one of the things you should know really best, right? And so we know we're looking at the function of the behavior of talking to himself. Well, immediately when you see talking to himself, one function should come to mind, and that's automatic, right? Because automatic is not socially mediated. So by talking to himself, that seems to be very automatic. And we know the mathematician talks to himself to solve problems. In addition, though, when he's talking to himself, he is removing roadblocks. And so if the mathematician is removing roadblocks, what's he doing? He's escaping those aversive stimuli. So what could the function of talking to himself be if one, it's not socially mediated, and two, he's escaping? A, attention. Is the mathematician seeking attention here? Well, it doesn't appear so because it doesn't seem like the behavior is receiving any attention it wasn't getting prior. What about B, escape? Is talking to himself leading to escape? It is. When the mathematician talks to himself with complex problems, he can start to remove those roadblocks that were in his way. The one possible function is escape. Remember, behaviors can have multiple functions. So C, automatic. And we talked about why automatic makes a lot of sense. He's talking to himself. There's nobody else involved in this equation. And so it's not socially mediated. It must be automatic. So really, the function of talking to himself could be either escape or automatic. Behaviors can have multiple functions, right? And this is also a good example of why we read all of our answer choices. We can't just stop at B or C and move on. You've got to know why the right answer is correct and why the wrong answers are wrong. A father tells his son to go upstairs and grab his shoes so that they can get ready to leave. The son runs upstairs, grabs his shoes, and puts them on his feet. They then both get in the car, and the son says, "Where are we going?" What is the listener behavior in this scenario? Interesting. So we have a question about listener behavior. And in Skinner's verbal behavior, you have a speaker and you have a listener. And the listener is often there to reinforce the speaker and then also, obviously, to take directions and instructions, that sort of thing, right? Receptive language, receptive instructions is often now called listener behavior. And so when we're looking for the listener behavior, we're looking for somebody not necessarily speaking, but being the social partner in the verbal exchange. And so the father tells his son to go upstairs and grab his shoes so they can get ready to leave. That is speaker behavior, not listener behavior. The son runs upstairs, grabs his shoes, and puts them on his feet. Now, the son, in this case, is the listener, right? He is the social partner in this exchange, and he's the one receiving the verbal behavior from the father. Then they get in the car, and the son says, "Where are we going?" In this case, the son has become the speaker, and that's how verbal behavior works. Speaker to listener, The listener says something, they become the speaker, back and forth, back and forth. And so when we're just looking at the listener behavior, we're just looking at what the son does in response to the father's speaker behavior. So A, the father telling the son to go upstairs and grab his shoes. We've already established that is the speaking behavior. The father in that case is the speaker, not the listener. Now let's look at B and C. B, the son going upstairs and grabbing his shoes. C, the son going upstairs and grabbing his shoes. Both are listener behavior. One is nonverbal, one is verbal. There's a difference, right? In this case, the son has engaged in nonverbal listener behavior. He just followed instructions, right? Essentially receptive instructions. And then D, the son asking where they are going. D is when the son becomes the speaker himself. In this case, the listener behavior is the son going upstairs and grabbing his shoes. And it is specifically nonverbal listener behavior. Now, nonverbal versus verbal listener behavior is one step deeper, but as you get better, you want to go a little deeper on your knowledge. I always say when you're first starting, you want to be 100% fluent on the foundationals, right? So that means everything in the task list. Too many people want to go through Cooper and try to memorize Cooper. It's not a winning formula, right? Because Cooper is so dense. So once you've got that task list, the foundations memorized, then we go a little deeper. That's a good way to approach it. So the listener behavior here, son going upstairs, grabbing his shoes, specifically it's nonverbal listener behavior. The good behavior game is an empirically validated behavior management strategy for use with groups of learners, clients, or students. Most often, the good behavior game is what type of contingency? All right, so the good behavior game, kind of a teaching question here. The good behavior game is very common. It's always mentioned in Cooper and other ABA texts, and we're looking for what type of contingency it is. Well, clearly it's going to be a group contingency, right? Because it's a strategy with groups of learners. Now, in the good behavior game, you have two teams. One team is competing against the other, and they're trying to beat the other team. And so everything that team is doing is starting to be dependent on each other. Now be careful here, right? Because the whole team, right, relies on everybody else in their team. And so when the whole group is relying on everybody else in the group, what do we call that? Well, we call that interdependent. Don't get that confused with dependent, right? Which is when we are referring to a hero, right? We're relying on a singular person or a small subset. Interdependent, the whole group is relying on the whole group as a whole. And then independent is when you're reliant on yourself. So the good behavior game, each group is relying on all their other group members. Now, this is more of a knowledge expansion question, right? Go look up the good behavior game if you aren't familiar with it. Is it going to be on the exam? Maybe, maybe not, but people talk about it. You're going to want to be familiar with it and at least know what the good behavior game is, and specifically what type of contingency is used in the good behavior game, what's interdependent, because each group is relying on everybody else in that group. Thank you for watching. Check out behavioranalyst.com for all of our study materials. Please subscribe if you have not already. As always, work hard, study hard. We'll see you soon.